Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the fairgrounds.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired. 4:15 AS. Route 291 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, America. Breaking news, deadly church shooting. Tragedy in Charleston. At least 9 people killed overnight in a massacre in an historic black church.
I do believe this was a hate crime.
Police say this suspect, a white man in his 20s, walked into the Bible study, sat down with the group, and opened fire.
This is a most unspeakable and heartbreaking tragedy.
Though this podcast typically ends each show with the conclusion or belief that serious mental health issues existed with so many of the shooters, mental health issues that, if properly treated, closely monitored, and evaluated, may have been the difference between deadly destruction and preserving human life. Adequate mental health care could be a contributing factor in the eventual elimination of mass shootings. On the other hand, some of the shootings are rooted in deep-seated hate, evil, and pure racism. Today's case is just that, a reflection of how terrible things can go wrong when such racist beliefs are nurtured and allowed to grow over the years, past the point of no return. Because the extent of information provided is voluminous, we will present today's case slightly different from our typical format. First, we will discuss the shooting and then transition into the investigation and background of the shooter. In the second half, we will introduce the victims and some of their backgrounds. We will also explain how the members of the Mother Emanuel AME Church expressed love over hate, basking the shooter in the kind of forgiveness that the Lord himself would show. For that was the way of the congregation, and how the dearly departed would likely want it as well. Today's case, if you haven't already guessed, is the mass shooting at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. If you haven't yet guessed which case this is, it may be because the shooter's identity was splashed all over social media and TV, making this shooting more well known by the name of the shooter, rather than the place and the people whose faith he could not destroy. Though we will discuss many facts about the shooter, it is the sincerest hope of this podcast team that after listening, you will recognize it because of the victims, survivors, first responders, and church that lost so much on June 17th, 2015, not because of the shooter's name.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name. We will refer to today's shooter as John.
Wednesday, June 17th, 2015 was a very humid, sticky hot day in Charleston, South Carolina. The day turned to evening, and dusk slowly fell over the city as residents bustled about, running last-minute errands for the day, or quieting down the children, who were still buzzing with excitement over the beginning of the summer season. At the Mother Emanuel AME, or African Methodist Episcopal Church, located at 110 Calhoun Street, the Wednesday night Bible study was about to commence. The church was a beautifully preserved old building that was erected in 1891, making it the oldest AME church in the South. Though the exterior underwent several repairs and renovations over the years, the interior remained wonderfully intact, with much of the original charm and fixtures. It was very large, holding a capacity of 2,500 people, and thus was one of the largest black churches in Charleston. 21-year-old John arrived in Charleston at approximately 7:45 p.m. on the evening of June 17th. Armed with a Glock 41 .45 caliber handgun with hollow bullet points, he drove a dark-colored Hyundai Elantra that he parked in the lot adjacent to the church. At about 8:06 p.m., John entered the church through a side door, which entered directly into the Bible study room that was located in the basement. Bible study had already started when John arrived. Participants looked up to notice a young man with a slight, nearly frail-looking build. His hair was styled into a bowl cut, and he was wearing a gray long-sleeve shirt with a white t-shirt underneath, black pants, and a tactical pouch. He carried 7 magazines. Each magazine held 11 hollow-point bullets, and the gun, which had a magazine inside. All were concealed in the pouch. Evening Bible study was already in progress, with 12 attendees present when John joined the group. Parishioners eagerly welcomed John into the fold without hesitation. Their immediate acceptance was a stark contrast to the animosity that John later displayed. Reverend Clementa Pickney invited him in to join the group, which John did, though he sat with his head hung low and eyes downcast. The Reverend handed John a Bible and worksheet for that evening's topic. While John made nearly no eye contact, he seemed to be listening and following along intently.
Came in, quiet, sitting there quietly. We thought maybe it was a college Charleston student or something, because we would have them come in periodically.
Tywanza Sanders uploaded a Snapchat video of himself at the Bible study, and John could be seen in the background, though he most certainly wasn't attempting to be caught on camera. As the Bible study was coming to a close, parishioners stood and closed their eyes, bowing their heads in prayer. As this was happening, John began firing the first shots. There is some contradiction as to whether John was standing or sitting when he started shooting. He claimed he was still sitting, but survivors later reported that he had stood in prayer with the rest of the group. The most likely scenario is that he was standing, after having pulled the weapon from the pouch simultaneous to rising from a seated position. After the initial gunshot, people started diving underneath tables or running for safety. Witness Felicia Sanders thought the noise came from a newly installed elevator, but then she saw it. She screamed, "He has a gun!" But John had already committed unspeakable damage. Reverend Pickney was the first to be shot, struck with 3 fatal shots.
Felicia yelled, "He's shooting everybody to get down," so I hit the floor. And that's probably what saved me. The bullets was flying everywhere. But I thought sure I was going to die.
Reverend Daniel Simmons Sr., often thought of as the backbone of the church, was a 74-year-old pastor who always carried his firearm with him. Except for that day. It was one of the only days that he didn't have it, though whether it would have helped or not will never be known. The attack was so wholly unexpected and shocking, the victims and witnesses so vulnerable in their moments of prayer, it's difficult to know if any other outcome would have been possible. Reverend Simmons Sr. was shot twice, which forced him to stumble backwards. He was shot a few more times, 4 in total, and he was still alive when John fled the scene. But he later succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. Tywanza Sanders was also shot several times and perished soon after the paramedics arrived. However, after he was shot, he tried reasoning with John, asking why. John simply stated in a cold, flat tone, "I have to do it. You rape our women, and you're taking over our country, and you have to go." It is one of the most disgustingly vile things any human could utter. Tywanza managed to stand up to John, trying desperately to protect his mother, niece, and Aunt Susie. His niece, who was only 11 years old, was in her mother's arms when her grandmother, Tywanza's mom, Felicia Sanders, laid atop her, acting as a human shield, protecting this young life from the horror that John was intent on inflicting on each innocent person inside the church that day. Tywanza was killed with his arm outstretched towards his Aunt Susie, as his mother watched the most devastating event any mother could see. She witnessed her own son's murder, and there was nothing she could do. Sharonda Coleman Singleton and DePayne Middleton Doctor were both shot and killed. Sharonda had 3 children and DePayne had 4, all girls. DePayne's girls were supposed to join her for Bible study that evening, but at the last minute, she allowed them to stay home, a decision that proved to be one she would have been deeply grateful for, even if it meant leaving them motherless. Myra Thompson was going to be leading the Bible study for her very first time that night. She received her preaching certificate that afternoon and was looking forward to taking the lead for the first time. Sadly, Myra was also killed that night. The church's librarian, Cynthia Hurd, was also shot and killed, as was Ethel Lance, the woman who was responsible for cleaning the church, and she loved decorating the church with fresh flowers. Ethel was shot 7 times. During the shooting, John paced about the room, screaming at people that were hiding under tables. He reloaded his weapon several times, much to the horror of those that were concealed from John's sight. Susie Jackson was shot 11 times, more than anyone else. Polly Shepard was hiding underneath one of the tables when she froze, in sheer panic. John's boots stopped, right next to where she crouched, trembling in fear. John heard Polly praying and snapped at her to shut up, and then immediately asked if he'd shot her yet, to which Polly replied, "No." John dispassionately told her that he wasn't going to kill her. No, he would leave her alive, so she could tell his story.
That's why I didn't shoot that other lady. I could have, but I didn't.
Do you remember telling that lady, "I'm going to let you live so you can tell my story"? Or something
yeah, I don't remember saying that, but there's really no story.
As soon as he said those words, John raised the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Except nothing happened. He was out of ammunition. John had reloaded 7 times, using up every last bit of the one thing he needed to continue the mass destruction inside the beautiful old church. During a pause in the shooting, Polly managed to call 911, begging for help. Jennifer Pinckney, who was hiding out in the pastor's study with her daughter, was also able to call 911 to report the shooting.
Please answer. 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Please, Emmanuel Church is plenty people shot down here. Please send somebody right away.
Emmanuel Church?
Emmanuel AME 110 Calhoun.
And there's people shot?
Yeah, he shot the pastor. He shot all the men in the church. Please come right away.
Okay, my partner's going to be getting some help on the way while I get a little bit more information from you, okay? Stay on the line with me. Are you safe?
He's still in here, I'm afraid. He's still in here.
Where are you?
I'm in Emmanuel AME Church on 110.
Yes, ma'am, but where are you inside the church?
In the lower level.
You're in the lower level? Where is the shooter?
He's in the office. Please send somebody right with me.
Yes, ma'am, I've got officers en route to you. Don't hang up with me. I want you to stay on the line with me. You stay as quiet as possible. Do you hear me?
Yes, somebody's going to take it over.
What is your name, ma'am?
Polly Shepard.
All right, Miss Polly. Like I said, my partner's getting some help on the way while I get this information from you, okay? You stay on the line with me.
He's coming, please.
Okay. Ma'am, are you able to... if he's coming, I need you to be as quiet as possible. Is there something that you can hide under? I'm under the table.